Along the busy Adriatic highway that connects the Italian coastal cities of Rimini and Riccione along the Adriatic Sea and in the shadows of the Apennine Mountains is a fenced-in concrete enclosure partially secluded by overgrown trees and weeds. The thousands of motorists that speed by this unkept site would likely never comprehend they are passing a cemetery with the remains of those who gave their lives to liberate the city of Rimini from Nazi occupation in September of 1944. Only two Greek flags fluttering in the sea breeze give a hint that those laid to rest along the road were heroic soldiers from Greece. They were of a brigade that served as part of the British Eighth Army that led the Adriatic sector of the Gothic Line Offensive, the offensive that took place during the last 9 months of World War II in Italy. After Hitler's Nazi forces and Mussolini's Italian fascist troops invaded Greece in 1941, the Greek military retreated to British army bases in the Middle East. From there, at the insistence of the Greek exiled government, the Greek military trained in Egypt and other parts of the Middle East and joined Allied armies in Italy in 1944. To tell us more about the Greek military odyssey that played such a crucial role in liberating Rimini, I have as my guest today Colonel Pangiotis Nakos. And Colonel Nakos is a military historian and is based in Athens. Colonel Nakos, welcome to the podcast. So, Colonel, following the occupation of Greece by Nazi Germany, two Greek brigades escaped to Egypt and played an important role in the Allied forces' pivotal El Alamein victory over the German army in Egypt in 1942. Now, following that victory, the Hellenic Brigade or Mountain Brigade was formed, and it would go on to participate as part of the British Eighth Army in the Adriatic sector of the Gothic Line Offensive. So, Colonel, can you tell us what led to the formation of the Hellenic Mountain Brigade in Egypt?
Okay, Mr. Kirwin, first of all, thank you. And it's my pleasure to be here in such an interesting podcast. First, it should be clarified that the two brigades didn't leave occupied Greece as fully formed units. They were constituted in the Middle East primarily from elements of the Evros Brigade, which had escaped Greece, and secondarily from the steady arrival of officers and enlisted men from occupied Greece. I would say, in short, the Hellenic army was born and trained in the British training centers of Lebanon, Syria, and Euphrates. So, in response to your question now, the first brigade of the two mentioned brigades have been prepared and trained for the Allied operations in Italy. This brigade was moved from Gaza to Egypt to address equipment and supply shortages and to complete preparations for its deployment to Italy. While the brigade's preparations were underway, an intense political dispute arose among personnel of the Greek army and the fleet in the Middle East, and that undermined the reliability of the Greek forces and their operational status, including, of course, the 1st Brigade itself. As a result, the Allied command cancelled the brigade's transfer and took decisive measures to address the situation. Consequently, after the turmoil among the Greek personnel, the idea arose to form a new brigade from selected officers and soldiers. And this was meant to be the 3rd Hellenic Mountain Brigade. This new military formation consisted of reliable and experienced troops.
So, was this brigade formed specifically to fight in Italy, or were there other reasons?
Officially, I would say it was formed specifically to fight in Italy. And saying officially, I mean there is no historical military archive that indicates the opposite. When the basic formation and manning of the brigade were completed on 19th June 1944, it was transferred to the British Mountain Warfare Training Center in Lebanon for brief training in mountain warfare and preparation with a view to its participation in the Allied operations in Italy.
Okay. So where and when did the Greek military soldiers brigades arrive in Italy?
Well, the brigade departed from Haifa on the morning of August 7 and arrived at Taranto in Italy on the morning of August 11. Then it was relocated on 26th of August to the interior of Italy, 6 kilometers north of Spoleto, which was 100 kilometers north of Rome. And then after 2 days, it was ordered to advance to the front zone in the city of Fieschi, which was 45 kilometers south of the front.
Okay. And where was the Hellenic Mountain Brigade's first combat engagement in Italy? Was it on the Gothic Line itself?
In general, it was on the Gothic line, but before the Battle of Rimini, specifically on the 3rd of September, the brigade was placed under the command of the 5th Canadian Division as its reserve and was ordered to move from the area of Iesi to the area of Santa Maria Pietrafita, 8 kilometers from the front line. During the same day, the artillery regiment of the brigade moved to the area of the Metaro River and was placed under the artillery of the 1st Canadian Army Corps. The movement of the brigade was completed in the afternoon of the 5th of September, and that day was meant to be the first engagement of the brigade's artillery when it participated in the assault by firing on the enemy location of Coriano. Now, as for the main body of the brigade, the next day, namely the 6th of September, by a new order from the 1st Canadian Army Corps, and that was apparently due to the constantly changing operational situation, the brigade's subordination was changed again. And this time, which was to be the last one, it was placed under the command of the 1st Canadian Division. According to its new mission, the brigade was to move on the night of September 8th to September 9 and replace the 3rd Canadian Brigade that had been deployed defensively northwest of the city of Cattolica from Riccione area to the Adriatic. So, apart from the brigade's artillery's earlier engagement, the brigade effectively entered the combat zone on the 9th of September. And this was shortly after its units took up their positions. Then it was when they encountered the enemy's night patrols, and in the resulting clashes, the brigade suffered its first losses, which were 15 dead and 34 wounded.
So while the Hellenic Brigade, the Mountain Brigade, was part of the British Eighth Army, they served under the command of the Canadian Army Division that was also on the Adriatic sector. And the Canadians were under the overall command of the British. So why were the Greek troops assigned to be under the Canadians?
Okay. Before answering, I should clarify a few points that may be obvious to military officers, but not to your listeners or to civilians in general. The British Eighth Army comprised the 2nd Polish Corps, the 1st Canadian Corps, the 5th British Corps, and the 10th British Corps. The 2nd New Zealand Division served as the British 8th Army's reserve, and the Hellenic Brigade was attached to it. So it was part of the British 8th Army's reserve. And as we know in military operations, a reserve force is employed at the commander's discretion according to the needs of the battle. In this case, the commander of the 8th Army could deploy wherever he considered necessary. Since the Hellenic Brigade had already demonstrated its combat effectiveness through exercises and readiness inspections, it was selected for deployment to the front line. So, given this, the commander of the 8th Army chose to use the Hellenic Brigade on the Adriatic sector of the 1st Canadian Division.
Okay, so the Hellenic Mountain Brigade, as we've been talking about, was tasked with going along the Adriatic coast where the terrain is flat instead of in the mountains that overlook the coast just 5-10 kilometers further inland. So why was not the Hellenic Mountain Brigade not tasked to fight in the mountains if they were in fact a mountain brigade?
It's a very interesting question, this, because the Allies initially intended to focus their main offensive on the central Gothic line along the Florence-Bologna axis to break through the front and destroy German forces in the Po Valley. However, the strength of the fortified mountain defenses made a frontal assault impractical. And for that reason, General Alexander revised the plan, ordering the Eighth Army to make the main attack on the right flank, with three army corps, the Polish, the Canadian, and the English, advancing at the same time. So, with the amendment of the Allied plan, the reserve had to be oriented towards in the eastern sector of the Gothic Line. On 11 August 1944, 2 days before the Allied plan of operations was amended, the Greek Brigade had arrived in Italy and being placed under the command of the New Zealand Expeditionary Corps under General Freyberg, and that was apparently due to their excellent preparation in the Greek area 3 years earlier. So the Greek brigade was advanced to the front line, serving as part of the 8th Army's Reserve, since the 2nd New Zealand Division, to which it was subordinated, was the 8th Army's Reserve. And as I said previously, a reserve force is employed at the commander's discretion, according to the needs of the battle. The Greek brigade was needed there because it was a fresh, well-trained infantry formation capable of attacking prepared positions. And in fact, its performance at Rimini validated this decision. Despite suffering significant casualties, it successfully accomplished its mission and earned one of the most distinguished battle honors awarded to any Greek unit in the Second World War II. However, I feel that I should mention the following. After the Battle of Rimini, about 1.5 months after the battle, in a secret telegram dated on 28 October 1944, General Freyberg stated that in his absence, the Third Hellenic Mountain Brigade had been pushed into a battle that was not properly planned for them, resulting in 100 casualties. That was the opinion of General Freyberg.
So the Greek Mountain Brigade is credited with the first major victory in breaking through the Gothic Line. Now, can you tell us a little bit about their task and how difficult it was?
Yes, the Greek brigade was ordered to launch a night attack against the enemy's defensive positions. Its area of operations was defined between the Delphium Road and Route 16, with the final objective being the capture of the city of Rimini, of course. The brigade's left flank was secured by the Canadian 3rd Brigade, while its right flank was covered by the 1st Canadian Royal Dragoons. So, on the night of September 14 to September 15, the general attack of the brigade, reinforced with Allied armored vehicles and machine gun platoons, began with the 3 battalions operating in 3 directions: towards Modicelli, the 2nd Battalion under the command of Major Giannettis, towards Monaldini, and 3rd Battalion under the command of Major Luterakis Andreas towards Batara. In the next 4 days, from 15 to 19 September, the brigade was reinforced with 16 British tanks and continued its attack to the north. And after crossing the Marano River, it captured Casalecchio, the Rimini airport, and Miramare, while also capturing German prisoners. On the 19th September, it continued its attack on the city of Rimini in 2 directions: the 2nd Battalion on the right up to the beach, the 3rd Battalion on the left in conjunction with the 3rd Canadian Brigade, and the 1st Battalion as the brigade's reserve. In the morning hours of 21st September, the 2nd Infantry Battalion finally entered the city, where the unconditional surrender protocol of Rimini to the Greek forces was signed. In the afternoon of the same day, a ceremony took place in the square, attended by delegations from the Canadian and New Zealand units, to pay homage to the war flag of the 2nd battalion. Now, as for how difficult the task was, I would say it was difficult and very costly. The brigade, lacking the heavy weapons which were available to its Canadian and New Zealand allies, faced a well-equipped enemy in strong defensive positions. Its success owed much to the courage and sacrifice of its officers and soldiers, as well as to the engineer platoons, which, despite their small size, cleared safe routes through enemy minefields for the advancing units. I should also point out the surgical unit of the brigade and, of course, the Hellenic hospital, which saved many officers and soldiers from certain death through the quick collection and treatment of the wounded men. The brigade's success was also recognized in, I would say, in striking terms by the commander of the Allied forces, General Alexander. In his report, he wrote, "I was happy because this success had so timely graced the destinies of this heroic country, which was the only fighting ally on our side in grievous times, and because a new victory in Italy had been added to the glory acquired on the mountains of Albania."
So now the Battle of Rimini is considered one of the most bloody, deadly periods of the Gothic Line Offensive, as more than 80,000 people, including Allied soldiers, German soldiers, and civilians, were killed during the month of September in 1944. So what was the casualty toll for the Greek troops during this period?
Yeah, the casualties of the brigade from the time it entered the operations in Italy to the day of the occupation of Rimini amounted to 6 dead officers and 72 soldiers, 19 wounded officers and 169 soldiers. And these casualties amounted to approximately 10% of its total force and 20% of the infantry battalion's force, which bore the brunt of the battle. So, the total casualties, I should say, of the Hellenic Mountain Brigade up until the end of the operations in Italy in November 1944 were 10 dead officers and 106 soldiers, 23 wounded officers and 293 soldiers. And these numbers of casualties indicates the effort made by the brigade, the value of the officers, everyone's faith in victory, and their eagerness to regain the trust of the Allies, which was undermined by the events that took place in the Middle East.
So the casualties, the soldiers that were killed, they're buried in the cemetery between Rimini and Cattolica in Italy. That's correct?
Yes, that's right.
So is the Greek victory in Rimini considered one of the great accomplishments of the Greek military in World War II?
Undoubtedly, I would say the greatest achievement was the epic 1941, where after rejecting the Italian ultimatum on October 28 in 1940, the Greek army repelled the Italian invasion. Then they launched a counteroffensive into Albania, capturing strategic cities, and later crushed Mussolini's 1941 spring offensive. So now, the Greek victory at Rimini also stands among the major milestones of Greece's wartime record, alongside the Battle of the Metaxas Line in 1941, the Battle of Crete, of course, the Sacred Bud, and the Middle East campaigns from 1941 to 1945. Rimini is nonetheless considered one of the most prestigious and professionally respected achievements of the Greek military in World War II, because I would say it symbolizes the return of a regular Greek field formation to offensive operations alongside the Western allies after years of occupation. It demonstrated that a relatively small but highly trained Greek formation could successfully carry out a difficult assault against well-prepared German defenses.
So how important was the role of Greek soldiers in liberating Rimini in terms of post-World War II Greece, especially as it concerned relations between Italy and Greece?
I think this question can be answered by quoting the phrase "take revenge" used by the brigade commander Thrasivoulos Tsakalotos in his order he issued upon the brigade's arrival in Taranto. Despite this phrase, the Greek soldiers showed particularly friendly behavior towards the Italian people. And essentially, this phrase, take revenge, had a double meaning. On the one hand, revenge against the Italian army that, while defeated by the Greeks and pushed out of national territory, returned as an army of occupation after the German intervention, and on the other hand, revenge against the atrocities committed by the Axis occupations in Greece. But I should mention that in no case did this slogan include the Italian people, especially in the south where the Greek-speaking areas of the former Greater Greece are located.
So when you just mentioned the atrocities that were carried out in Greece, you're speaking of atrocities by both the Italian fascist Mussolini troops as well as the Germans. Is that correct?
As well as the Germans, yes, as well as the Bulgarians, because the occupation was triple. Greece was divided into zones of control by the Germans, Italians, and Bulgarians.
And so did the victory in Rimini help ease the bitterness against Italy after the war, considering what Mussolini's fascist troops had done?
Yes, to some extent, but probably less than it is often assumed. Other developments soon overshadowed the resentment caused by Italy's 1940 invasion, including the much harsher and more destructive German occupation of Greece from 1941 to 1944, the famine, reprisals, and massacres that occurred during the occupation, and of course the outbreak of the Greek Civil War from 1946 to 1949, which quickly became the dominant political and social issue in Greece. As a result, I would say that the Italian sentiment after 1945 was generally less intense than the German sentiment, despite Italy having initiated the war against Greece in October 1940 under Benito Mussolini. So, in 1944, the fact that Greek soldiers entered an Italian city as part of the Allied liberation effort, and the fact that they were welcomed by civilians rather than fighting Italians, the enemy was Nazi Germany and not Italy. And this helped, I would say, to create a narrative that distinguished between fascist Italy and the Italian people. And that distinction made reconciliation easier.
So after success of the liberation of Rimini, what happened to the Greek mountain brigades that were on the Gothic Line as part of the British Eighth Army?
After the capture of Rimini on 21st September, the Hellenic Mountain Brigade continued taking part in further operations against the retreating German forces along the Adriatic front. However, it didn't participate in any battle as famous as Rimini. In October 1944, German forces began withdrawing from Greece. As the country was being liberated, the Greek government in exile returned from abroad accompanied by British forces. Then it was decided that the Hellenic Mountain Brigade should return home as the devastation from the severe and inhumane occupation by the Axis forces, Greece and its government was, I would say, in urgent need of a disciplined and reliable regular army. So the brigade sailed from Italy and arrived in Greece in November 1944.
So was Italy required to pay reparations to Greece after World War II?
Yes, but not to the full extent of the damage caused by the Italian occupation. And the issue remains somewhat complicated from a legal, political, and historical perspective. After World War II, Italy was obliged to pay war reparations under the 1947 Paris Peace Treaty. Greece received reparations from Italy amounting to 105 million, and these were not paid exclusively in cash, but mainly through the provision of industrial equipment, commercial products, other assets, construction works, and infrastructure. Of course, I should mention, as the main territorial compensation was the cession of the Dodecanese Islands to Greece, which was defined in the Paris Treaty. The victorious powers considered these reparations as the official settlement of the Greek claims against Italy. However, these settlements didn't fully cover the human losses and material destruction suffered by Greece. I would say the bulk of current Greek claims concern Germany mainly for war reparations, the forced occupation loan, and compensation for massacres of civilians. So, in short, I would say Italy paid war reparations to Greece after the war. Still, these were limited in relation to the total cost of the occupation and are considered legally settled by post-war agreements.
So, were any of the Italian fascist military commanders who were responsible for the atrocities in Greece ever charged with war crimes?
No, there were some legal procedures underway, but I can't answer this question for sure.
So, last question.
Yeah.
Now, while the Greek army was in Egypt and then Italy, the Greek communist resistance fighter groups, ILAS, they were receiving significant help from the British government, including weapons. When the Nazi German army left Greece in 1944, the British turned around and had to send troops, including an Indian division, to stop the communist resistance fighters. And that led to a 3-year civil war, which you had mentioned earlier. So has there ever been retrospective doubt about whether it would have been better to send the Greek army back to Greece rather than to Italy? And had that happened, might it have prevented the ensuing post-World War II Greek Civil War?
Well, you will agree with me that history is not written with assumptions and what ifs. The Greek army, as we mentioned, was formed in the Middle East with the decisive assistance of the British to participate in allied operations. The Greek government wanted to contribute as much as possible to the allied struggle to make Greece's presence felt and to strengthen its position. The brigade was composed of disciplined, experienced, and war-ready officers and soldiers, the result of a great effort by the Greek government and the British to overcome political differences. It acted as ordered and successfully fulfilled its mission in Italy. When it was ordered to return to Greece, it returned with great enthusiasm. Furthermore, allow me to mention the following. The German troops withdrew from Greece on October 14, 1944, and 4 days after, the Hellenic government was transferred from Italy and relocated to Athens. At the same time, under an agreement signed by the governments of Greece and Great Britain, the transfer and landing of Allied troops in Greece were authorized. And in this context, the brigade's return to Greece was planned and ultimately took place in early November. As a result, the Hellenic Brigade was in Athens when it was needed, operating under the orders of the Greek government alongside British forces and the Indian division, as you mentioned. Therefore, in my opinion, although I am answering to a hypothetical question, I will agree to the prevailing view of the modern historians that moving this army directly into mainland Greece earlier wouldn't have prevented the ensuing civil war.
Well, Colonel, thank you very much for participating in the discussion today. It's very interesting to get your thoughts, and certainly at some point in the future, we will take up this question about whether they could have prevented the Civil War. That was Lieutenant Colonel Pangiotis Nakos, who is an official historian with the Greek army, and he's based in Athens. And of course, being a military official, as Colonel Naxos noted at the end of the interview, he was not able to answer any politically sensitive questions relating to some issues that still linger in Greek politics today, as well as in Greek, Italian, and German international relations. However, my next guest in this two-part series will be Paolo Fonzi, who is an Italian professor of history at the University of Naples in Italy. He's an author of several books on Greek history, including the World War II years before and after. Also, he served as a fellow at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the United States. and he will give us his own thoughts on some of these issues. And of course, Professor Fonzi's answers were not restricted. They didn't have to go through a vetting process, as was the case with Colonel Naxos and his answers.